We're talking with journalist and author Max Blumenthal. Now, Max has recently written a piece about Nikki Haley, whose star seems to have, in my mind, inexplicably, or perhaps explicably, risen in recent weeks. So first of all, Max, always great to talk to you. Secondly, so tell me about Nikki Haley and her resignation and the reaction. Let's start with this. You went and heard Nikki Haley speak, but she resigned as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, surprised a lot of people, caught a lot of people off guard, and got her what I consider to be an extraordinary amount of good press.
Yeah, I went to see her speak 5 days before that resignation, and I was the only journalist in the room at an event of 300 of the people who control the Christian right and the extreme right grassroots of the Republican Party. And she was there to receive her anointing for what appeared to be a future presidential run. And so I wasn't actually shocked by her sudden resignation as much as disturbed. And I was doubly disturbed by the reaction to it from the liberal media. I don't know what to call them. The New York Times and the New Yorker both really gave her an endorsement and said this is a moment of hope for people who are against Trump. She's the most senior insider, never Trumper, even though she went to work for Donald Trump and really carried out his agenda at the UN. The New York Times said we would like a UN ambassador in her mold and that she was a moderate. I think they actually used that term, moderate. I remember her being an extreme militarist and kind of a fanatic. And she
was a very divisive and partisan governor.
Yeah, she came out of the Tea Party.
So what is that all about? It seems to me, well, did I interrupt you? Because it seems to me.
Feel free to interrupt.
Yeah. Okay. It seems to me that when this kind of thing happens, and you quote the editors at the time, Nikki Haley will be missed, is how the New York Times editorial board, as you quote them, praised her as a pragmatic envoy. Well, I'm not sure exactly what her diplomatic accomplishments were, which is normally how we think of pragmatism working in diplomacy. Her role was constructive, quote unquote, can exit the administration with her dignity largely intact. Well, first of all, dignity is binary. I mean, you either have it or you don't. So if it's largely intact, you don't have it. But that's not what they meant to convey. The, quote, a hopeful sign for opponents of Trump. It's almost as if the media and political elites want to want to anoint these figures with the minimum possible qualifications as being the anti-Trump so that the opposition to Trump doesn't take any truly transformative political shape. Do you get what I'm driving at?
Yeah.
That it's kind of a funneling process. But maybe I'm wrong. Why do you think they would anoint somebody like Nikki Haley?
I agree completely. She represents in their minds continuity between Republican and Democratic administrations, where she's the bridge of the bipartisan national security state. A lot of Democrats supported the war in Iraq, and George W. Bush enjoyed high approval ratings until that war became what we always said it would be. But the other aspect of it is that confuses and confounds me about this liberal celebration of Nikki Haley is that I thought that liberals felt really strongly about protecting a woman's right to choose, about reducing gun violence, about protecting the rights of LGBT people. Nikki Haley had gone to this extreme Christian right conference to get her real anointing, and these people, this faction of the Republican Party, they call themselves the grass tops, because they basically shepherd the Republican grassroots to the polls on election day. And not only that, they decide what the battle lines are domestically. Had held their conference, their secret conference for Nikki Haley in North Carolina to stand in solidarity with the state's Republican legislature because it had overridden a Charlotte city council resolution requiring businesses to maintain gender-neutral bathrooms. Basically, the conference was decided by bathrooms and their obsession with the gay menace. And Nikki Haley had gone there in secret to pay homage to this group. So you would think that liberals would be slightly troubled about this and about Nikki Haley's own record as South Carolina governor, where she governed to the hard right on social issues. I think on social issues, Donald he's been horrible. The Christian right loves him. But Nikki Haley will give much more full-throated support to the Christian rights agenda, as George W. Bush did. And it's almost like we forgot George W. Bush's whole 2004 re-election closing argument wasn't about Iraq or whatever. It was about bashing gays. Gay people shouldn't get, same-sex marriages shouldn't happen. And now he's our friend, and the Atlantic Council gave him some giant award, and he has a positive Democratic approval rating, and Michelle Obama calls him her partner in crime.
Look, on the negative side, George W. Bush, needless war that killed probably 1 million people, cost trillions of dollars, massive invasion of Americans' civil liberties, aggressively against women's right to choose and other fundamental human rights for LGBTQ people and others. But on the plus side, he gave Michelle Obama a piece of candy. So I think it's about a wash, don't you? I mean, obviously I'm being sarcastic, but one of the things that amazes me about the liberal commentariat, and frankly a lot of Democratic voters here, because I saw a poll a couple months ago saying that 52% of Democratic voters now have a positive view of George W. Bush. Now, this is a man who, while president, I think was pushing hard to try to get 30% of total approval of the entire electorate. Now, more than half of Democrats approve of him because he isn't Donald Trump. Don't we have a kind of, doesn't a certain element of our population have a collective amnesia here?
I guess a big part of this is Russiagate, that Nikki Haley was extremely anti-Russia at the UN, and the Democrats have finally found an external enemy. The Republicans had that is a fifth column in the U.S. They believe there's a fifth column in the U.S. The Republicans had Muslims and ISIS and whatever, any Arab leader they wanted to take out. The Democrats have Russia and Russian active measures and influence agents, like poor little Marina Butina, who's in solitary confinement right now because she ran a gun club and might have been an unregistered lobbyist. I think she's a political prisoner. But in any case, that's why Nikki Haley is beloved. She is seen to have, forced Trump to take a harder line against Russia, and she is in on the next war, which will be on China, the next kind of phase of the Cold War. I don't think we can have a conventional war against China. So I was at this event, and I want to just go back to that a little bit.
Yeah,
it's called
sure.
the Council for National Policy. This is, a secret, semi-secret group that really represents the Illuminati of the Republican grassroots, top activists of the Republican Party. It was founded in 1981. Anyone you can think of in the Christian right who's influential is a member of it. Tony Perkins, who runs the anti-gay, anti-abortion policy factory in Washington, the Family Research Council, is the president. And they hold their meetings off the record. The locations of the meetings are a secret. The membership rolls are a secret. You're not allowed to record inside. In fact, Tony Perkins threatened members and said, if you record, you'll be taken to a room and forced to watch Rachel Maddow. A friend of mine who's an anti-war conservative invited me and went through the formal process of inviting me, which meant that I had to be vetted by their staff. I just said, here's who I am. I run the Gray Zone Project. I'm this is what I wrote a book about the Gaza Strip. They just said, give us $675. And I said, okay, I'll be the only journalist who's ever gone to one of these, I think, so it's worth it. And then they took it and let me in. And so I was in, and Nikki Haley appears on stage at noon.
Was she announced? Were they expecting
Yeah,
her? Was
yeah.
it a surprise?
It was in the materials, and she appeared to a roaring ovation, and she proceeded to make statements that any anti-China hardliner would have applauded. So, obviously it was crafted for the Christian right, and her pro-Israel Likudnik politics. The Christian right loves that because Israel's the future landing pad of the Messiah. But there are other constituencies in Washington that are very powerful that love it too. So she talked about how she had been asking Henry Kissinger for advice every 2 months. She'd meet with him, and he was her personal mentor at the UN because she said that she didn't know what the UN did when she came into her job. And she didn't say this explicitly, but she kind of suggested it, that she deployed a version of Kissinger and Nixon's madman theory, where the president, you tell your adversaries that the president is so crazy you don't know what he'll do, so that they come to the negotiating table on your terms. And she told the Chinese ambassador that Trump was unpredictable. He might do a military invasion of North Korea unless China abstained from a resolution to sanction North Korea at the UN. So I thought that was pretty insane. Everybody in the crowd applauded. Nobody seemed disturbed by that in Washington. But it kind of fit with Trump's strategy of maximum pressure and, threatening fire and fury. But I actually think, the more I think about this threat, that's why Nikki Haley's got bipartisan popularity. And when I say bipartisan, I mean elite bipartisan popularity within the national security state. They want someone to take on China at that level. They're comfortable with that being the Republican president. What they're not comfortable with is Donald Trump having a peace summit in Singapore with North Korea because he's unpredictable and he might make peace. Right. I mean, Trump's unpredictability can go both ways. It's why I fear him, because he could, authorize a war if somebody gets in his ear. And he's authorized bombings of Syria, supposedly because his daughter Ivanka showed him pictures of children that moved him. Then it can go the other way too. They want someone who's part of the steady state. You remember the anonymous New York Times editorial signed by someone who's from the steady state? Nikki Haley represents the steady state. And what the steady state does and has done is destabilize entire regions of the world and cause refugee crises. So Nikki Haley's not only dangerous on that level, but what I kind of exposed in this Harper's piece is how she will be a hardliner on social issues that liberals really are very attached to. And, I would think that the people who donate to Planned Parenthood would be a little bit more worried about the anointing of Nikki Haley by the media outlets that they like.
Well, I think there are people in various elite groups who find predictability to be more important than any core value. And I think this is a perfect example of that. I also feel that they're weaponizing predictability. And I'm curious your thoughts about this, but I feel like, for example, Trump on trade is a perfect example. When Trump went, I think one of the reasons he won in the swing states was because he condemned NAFTA and other trade deals that, in fact, have been bad for working people. Now, the fact that there's no core there, he's unpredictable because he has no core values or coherent intellectual position, doesn't mean, he could have gone into renegotiated NAFTA and come up with a good deal. That was not outside the realm, or a better deal. That was not outside the realm of possibility. So, and they don't want that because the elites like NAFTA. They liked NAFTA. They like the other trade deals that are in place. They liked TPP. They would have liked to see that pass. So, as in national security matters, I think in terms of global finance and trade, this so-called steady state is, to me, it is the problem. It is the enemy. But to people like that, I think every other value is subsumed or put in a secondary position, including the ones that they mobilize voters with on the Democratic side, like individual rights, human rights, women's autonomy, women's right to choose. My suspicion is that for some people in the Democratic Party, that's not nearly as important as continuity. And that, in fact, this call for continuity, as with the Russia story. I mean, we could talk about Russia, but as with the Russia story, the desire for continuity is an excellent framework for culling those people whose points of view you do not want to see articulated in the political sphere, even if they're held by large numbers of Americans.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. And we also have to understand TPP and NAFTA from a geostrategic point of view. From a Machiavellian point of view, TPP was aimed at weakening China and interrupting the Belt and Road Initiative, which is, one of the most important aspects of Chinese power projection around the world, and is wanted by many countries that are involved because the Chinese leave infrastructure behind, unlike us. NAFTA was part of the destabilization of Mexico. The last thing the U.S. wants is a strong Mexico on its southern border. It would actually become possibly a strategic counterweight to America's ability to enforce the Monroe Doctrine and project its power south towards Venezuela. Lopez Obrador, this is someone that we saw a lot of griping about in the same editorial pages that praise Nikki Haley. On the other hand, I think that much of the Democratic the party power brokers, they don't think about foreign policy at all. They just leave it to the professionals. Same with the people who are the Republican Party consultants, the Karl Rove types. They only see foreign policy as a partisan issue. The reason that Jamal Khashoggi became such a big issue last week on MSNBC and CNN was because it was a way of embarrassing Trump. They don't actually care about what's going on internally in Saudi Arabia or Turkey or anywhere else. And the reason that the migrant caravan is such a big deal on Fox has nothing to do with the destabilization or conditions in Central America. It's a partisan issue for scaring Republicans about a horde of brown people coming to the U.S. supposedly with financing from Jewish oligarchs. I mean, that's the only reason they cover foreign policy. People ultimately are fighting over social issues and they're playing out a culture war. And so I think there should be more concern about what Nikki Haley represents and what the Republican mainstream represents domestically and what George W. Bush represented and what his real legacy was. But we don't hear that discussed except on the campaign trail. So right now, if you watch a debate between, so you watch Stacey Abrams or Andrew Gillum or Beto O'Rourke, who really represent the future of the Democratic Party debate, they're not talking about Russiagate. They're not talking about anything that we see covered on CNN or MSNBC. They're talking about kitchen table issues. They're talking about inequality. They're talking about real stuff. I'm not saying I totally endorse them, but they have to cater to these to voters. And so I think that ultimately people will reject Nikki Haley, including in the Republican Party, the same way they rejected Jeb Bush, and that the future of Republican Party politics is not that different from the future of the Democratic Party if either side wants to win, which is populism, real populism, or, ultimately it'll be pseudo-populism like Donald Trump's because, you can't actually serve in power without being partially co-opted. But Nikki Haley will be exposed. I just think it's time to see the Republican Party for what it is and always has been, which is a party that's controlled by the radical right. And it's really revealing. The coverage of Haley is really revealing. It's sad that I had to make this intervention because it shows that the media isn't interested even in the core kitchen table issues that are moving Democratic voters and Republican voters.
Well, my saying, to get a political revolution, we need a media revolution. That's my hackneyed, but I believe it. I believe that we've got to cover this stuff or nobody else will.
I would just say a loss for corporate media is a win for the people. And, I've given up on the idea of kind of getting my voice in there. I don't want to break into corporate media. I want to break corporate media. And so we need to defend our little space here.
I couldn't agree more. And unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Max Blumenthal, as always, great to talk to you, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.